Thank you so much for joining us on our third webinar with the theme of leading and selling in a time of social distancing. During this webinar, we're going to have 4 different breakout sessions. And Keith and I received a lot of feedback since the webinar that we did on Monday that the breakout sessions were very well received. That there's obviously in this current environment, we're working out of our homes. We can have collaboration with our internal teammates, but it's hard to have collaboration with other people. Obviously, we're not networking right now. So we want to provide an atmosphere today where everyone can collaborate in some groups, probably 6 to 8 people per group. And we really look forward to putting you all through this process, and we're excited about that. So what's happening today? The first thing we're going to do is listening with compassion. And Linda Katz-Wilner, owner of Successfully Speaking, she's a communications expert. She is going to guide us through some very important parts around listening, in particular, listening in a world that's virtual now. What should we be focusing on? What's really important? So that we're really looking forward to that, and we'll do a breakout around that. Next, managing remotely. What's working? When we had the webinar this past Monday, we talked about different ways to manage remotely, from the setup to leading and selling remotely. So we want to talk about today what's working and what's not, and we'll set that up when we get to it. The next will be pipeline. And today's day, I mean, you think about from a selling perspective, as we spoke about on the last one, it's hard. You don't want to appear opportunistic. You don't want to appear insensitive. Those perceptions can be rampant today with so many different emotions going on. At the same time, the ethical thing to do, the right thing to do, is to realize that you have value, you add value, you have products and services that add value, and it's about making connections right now and making connections with other people and touch points. And those touch points are very, 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 very valuable. So we'll do a breakout through current and future status of your pipeline. And the last breakout today will be on really You Inc. And those that have worked with us over the years understand You Inc. is You Incorporated. We have some that are business owners on this webinar. We have some that work for other companies. We have some that are in transition. There's a lot of different challenges right now. So really, current and future status of You Inc. We'll ask you to think about yourself, your family, what's going on, and to be vulnerable and share as we proceed through this webinar. So with that said, what I want to do is introduce Linda, and let me unmute Linda. That would be helpful. Linda, you there?
Yes, I am.
All right. So Linda owns Successfully Speaking. She's a communications expert and a very good friend. And Larry, her husband's a good friend as well. I don't want to leave Larry out of that. So Linda, if you could please take us through this, it's all yours.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And I was in last week's webinar, Chris, so I'd love to continue the conversation about what we can do with our soft skills, since I'm a soft skills specialist. I'd like to talk about listening with compassion. And the first thing that I talk about is helping people elevate their listening skills. We often speak about our speaking skills and how we can be better speakers. And I think we're missing the boat if we don't talk about listening. Those of you who know me know that I talk a lot about the 3 V's of communication: the visual, how you look; the vocal, how you sound; and the verbal, what you say. And we think about this a lot when we're talking, and we're going to have to think about it even more when we're working virtually. Maybe we're just using a telephone, so there is no visual, and our vocal will become more important. Maybe we're using both the visual with the camera, so we have to think about how are we coming across visually. So those are ways that we send out information. But as we know, communication is a back and forth process. And so as much as you may be judging me by how I look, how I sound, and what I say, I'm judging my communication partner. And so I'm watching all of these things. And that's where the OLE approach to communication comes about. And I teach this. And that is, as you look inside the gear, observe. So observe what they look like. Listen to what they say. And that allows you to engage. And the perfect example of this would be is, Chris, if I called you and I said, "How are you doing, Chris?" And you say, "I'm okay." Well, your words said you were okay, but if I don't pay attention to how you look and how you sound, I'm not being a good listener or observer. And so that's what I'd like to take you through today and talk about what are the different ways that we can listen when we're with our communication partners, be it our boss, our colleague, our children, our spouse, our significant other, or whoever else it might be. So I know many of you have seen this quote on the next slide, and I bet if I asked everybody to raise their hand, if this is them, most of the people are going to respond that most of us do not listen with the intent to understand the speaker. We listen with the intent to reply. We're always thinking about what are we going to say, and we miss what the other person is telling us. And we have to really think about this now when people have a lot going on in their heads that when they're talking, we have to wait and listen to them. So how do we go about this? What's important with listening? And the first thing, Chris, if we want to move forward is, you don't have to answer this in the chat box, but I want you to think about this today, and I want you to think about this moving forward. What does listening mean to you? And why is it important when we're dealing with people? And let's move to the next one. Next slide, Chris. First, we have to decide what is that difference between hearing and listening. We can all, unless we have a hearing loss, we can hear things. Hearing, if you can click on the next slide, hearing is the physical act, detecting sounds. I hear the noise in the background. I hear my husband talking. I hear him, but am I listening to him? Because listening is intellectual. Listening is emotional. We need to understand and interpret not just that verbal, but the nonverbal. And that's where it's going to be very important during these times. We're not sitting in the same room with them. So turn on your webcams so we can communicate more effectively. And I can read your body language. I can see your facial expression, and it helps me become a better listener. Now, there are so many different types of listening. I'm not going to go into each type. And Chris, I know we're going to send a handout that has this information on it. So you'll get this afterwards. There are different types of listening, but what I'd like to focus on are three main types: active listening, empathetic, and compassionate. And let's talk a little bit about active. I'm sure everybody has heard about active listening. That's one of the soft skills we're supposed to have. It's listening to that complete message, both the verbal and nonverbal, and it's focused. But active listening is not the listening we want. We hear it all the time. But there's a problem with active listening. Active listening can be faked. I can pretend as Lou, maybe you're talking to me and I'm shaking my head and I'm nodding and I'm saying, I get it. But I could be sending emails to somebody else at the same time. I can fake active listening. So even though we use that term, we need to go deeper. Empathetic listening gets into the speaker's movie. And what I mean by that is they're getting their perspective. I may think that what Ron is saying doesn't make any sense at all, but that's his perspective. That's his movie. I have to get into his reality and interpret what he's saying from his perspective, somewhat like just stepping into somebody else's shoes. That's empathetic. But with colleagues, I've spoken about it and I realized, and this is before everything's gone on with the pandemic, compassionate goes even deeper. Compassionate is listening without any judgment, allowing somebody to speak and not feeling the need that I have to say, oh yes, I feel that way too, or yeah, that happened to me, or you wouldn't believe what happened to me. That's not compassion. Compassion is let that person talk, sit back, give them all the space, and you're very engaged. And we're giving a gift to somebody by doing that. That's the listening we may need to do in the coming weeks when we're working with people. So we'd like to do our first breakout. And in this breakout, what I'd like you to discuss with your group is, what does it feel like when your communication partner, be it your coworker, your spouse, your child, your friend, does it feel like when they're a poor listener? And what does it take to be a good listener? What are things you can do to show them that you're a good listener? And then I'll send it over to you, Chris or Keith, so we can break out into those groups.
Thank you, Linda. And what we're going to do, to Linda's point, we're going to break out into about 11 breakout rooms, 11 to 12 breakout rooms. When I click the button, I'm going to encourage you all, if you can, to put your camera on so you can see the other people in your breakout room. There'll be about 5 to 6 other people. There'll be leaders in this breakout. There'll be salespeople. There'll be all different roles in this breakout. So I encourage you as someone to step up first, to go first, start to share what it feels like when welcome back everybody. And Linda, I'll turn it back to you to really close us out on the listening part before we move forward.
Sure. If we can just move to the next slide. Some great comments in our group as
Excellent.
Well. There's a wonderful Chinese symbol. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it's a symbol for active listening, which, as you know, I think it goes deeper than that. But this does go deeper than that, because if you know, with Chinese symbols, each part means something for the whole word. You need your ears to hear. You need your eyes to see. That's that ole I spoke about. You need undivided attention to focus on your listener. But to me, where the compassion and empathy comes in is you need to use your mind to think about what they're saying. And most importantly, use your heart so that you can feel their emotions. And to me, that's the quintessent listener. If you can do all of these things, and we should strive to do that every time we're speaking with somebody and listening to somebody.
Absolutely.
And if we move forward. So there are barriers though, right? Things happen. We have our personal agendas. There's the noise in the background. There's maybe I feel intimidated by the status, or I don't think that person is prestigious enough, and so I stop listening. Gender, race, and age speak for themselves. Maybe their physical appearance is a distraction and they lose their credibility. Maybe I had such a bad situation with that person before, whatever he says or she says, I'm not going to listen to. And again, what is my relationship with that speaker? All of these become barriers that would prevent us from being a good listener. And then if we can move to the next slide, Chris, what are the things we can do? And I'm not talking about how to fake it, but just be ready and motivated to listen. Give that person your undivided attention. Read their nonverbal, which means not just how they look, but how they sound. What else are they communicating besides the words they're using? I'm okay may sound good, but read the nonverbal. Listen to what they're saying, interpret it, show some empathy, and try to withhold any judgment and let them talk. And most of all, know what your filters are. We all have our own filters. Know what they are so that you can monitor them and say, okay, let's put that aside. I'm not going to judge that person. I'm going to listen to them. And with all of those, you're going to enhance and elevate your listening skills. And if you can move to the next slide, Chris. So my challenge for you is, what are you going to do differently from this brief conversation we had? I'd be happy to speak to you more after this, or if you have any questions, but hopefully this gave you some ideas on a few things you can do differently and move forward from here and become a more compassionate listener.
Thank you, Linda, very, very much. And when you think about active listening, I will always have the thought that no one can be a really good listener unless they work on it. Anyone that really climbs to the top of the mountaintop and says, I'm a great listener, without understanding what a great listener has to do to actively listen and be compassionate, they're almost kidding themselves, because it's very, very challenging. Mm-hmm. We all have different thoughts go through our head all the time, especially in times of crisis. We're going to be thinking about so many different things, our own security, safety, our family, everything. So more important now than ever to be an active listener. So Linda, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
Okay. Now, what Keith and I are going to do, we're going to take you through 3 other breakouts, and we're going to talk about really what's happening right now, obviously, in this world that we're all living in. So when you think about how your leadership and selling behavior has changed as a result of coronavirus, that list can be endless. And by the way, please feel free to use the chat as we go through this with any of your observations or ahas as we go through these breakouts. Now, the next breakout we're going to do is around managing remotely. On the webinar we had on this past Monday, again, we talked about different strategies for managing remotely. And at the end of this, I know there's some people on this webinar that weren't on the one from last Monday, I'll send out at the end of the day today an update that includes this update, some tools from this webinar, plus the information from the Monday webinars if you choose to look through that. So in this breakout, literally talk about what's working remotely. I mean, what's working, what's not working. Have you had to set up a schedule? Is that schedule just been effective every day, or is it just gone to, is it blown up? So just talk about what's working in your world, share best practices, be vulnerable, talk about where things may not be working, and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes. Actually, it'll be a little bit longer, about 7 or 8 minutes for this one. You'll notice when I close the breakout room, you have 60 seconds to come back. So go ahead and break out and give me a second. Okay. So thank you for sharing in those breakouts. Again, anything you want to share in the chat, Keith will be monitoring the chat, and as will I, and we'll share any of the best practices that you want to put in there. And again, with the follow-up email later, we're going to ask for any best practices as well. So thank you for that. Now, as we move forward, the next breakout in a few minutes is going to be around pipeline and what are our behaviors. And to begin to set that up before Keith takes you through that breakout, it's really important to understand that, stating the obvious, we have to revise our behaviors. Okay? We're in a situation right now where we're not doing face-to-face networking events. We're not doing in-person calls. Travel, I mean, the airline industry, there's really no one flying right now. Event marketing, lunch meetings, et cetera, all that's on pause. Note that it's not going away. I think when it comes back, it's going to come back extremely strong. We all know that. New behaviors, video conferencing, social selling, all these different things are new. And when you think about the last one there, client relationships, we have to think about new ways to build those relationships with our clients. Now, we've all heard SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, or relevant, and time-bound. Think about right now, and this will come in when we talk about the U Inc. later in the webinar. But what's enjoyable in a time of crisis? What can you do that's enjoyable? I mentioned the other day, this is borderline whether this is enjoyable or not. From a family perspective, we've been working on a couple of jigsaw puzzles that we haven't done in a million years. And these puzzles are actually pretty hard. So I'm thinking about grabbing one of the ones on the shelf over here that's like when my kids were 9 years old, to bring those out and try those again. But anyhow, really think about what's enjoyable, what's not from a business and personal perspective, and what's rewarding. Now, from a business perspective, and Keith mentioned this on the webinar, our first webinar we did around leading and selling through these times last week. It's a CARE acronym, and we'll send this tool out at the end of this webinar. But really, the CARE acronym is about your current clients. There's 4 different buckets, and we'll send this out for you to be able to really put your different clients in different buckets. The first one is keep, your keep accounts. What are your accounts that you know that have been with you for a while and they're great clients? Maybe they're struggling right now, like everybody is with different things. It's reaching out to them and touching base. Attain, these are the ones that in the past have not known they should love you yet, to be quite frankly. They are your prospects. They are ones that have been out there and you've identified as companies you want to work with but haven't yet. And thinking about the approach there, we'll talk about that in a few moments as well in this uncertain time. Recapture are folks that you used to work with. Thinking about just reaching out to companies, people you've worked with in the past, touching base with them, seeing how they're doing, and expand our current companies you work with right now that have a huge opportunity to grow. It may not be in the present day, but it could be, depending on the business, where they're going to grow in the future. But they're clients of yours that you know that there's growth potential because of the sheer size, in most cases, of their organization. Now, a Sandler rule that's been in force from David Sandler for many, many, many years is you really can't manage anything you can't control. In particular, right now with the coronavirus, we cannot control it. All we can do is manage our behaviors, our touch points. And that's what Keith's going to talk about in a few moments before we go into a breakout. Now, your current, your connection questions, when you think about that, we have to think about how we change those questions and really not ignoring the fact when we reach out of the coronavirus. As we talked about the other day, it may sound like this. Hi, Stan, it's Chris. We haven't talked in several months. Obviously, meeting face to face right now is not happening. Just reaching out to touch base, to say hello, to see how you're doing, and throughout that conversation, to see how your company's doing through this crisis. What's happening in your marketplace? What's happening in your business? Really, all around changing and modifying your connection questions to be to not ignore, but to fully embrace what's going on in today's world. Now, with that, there's 4 buying emotions. And it's really about, on the left, you'll see pain in the present and pain in the future. Pain in the present is going to be obviously a very hot item right now, because there's a lot of pain. It could be emotional pain, financial pain, all these different things going on, and you're just having a conversation with them. And a lot of people right now just simply want someone to talk to. A business owner could be very lonely right now. A lot of different things going on. Pain in the future, they're concerned about what their world's going to be, obviously, down the line. So it's talking to them about that. It's not selling in this mindset. It's really reaching out and connecting with them as more of that trusted advisor. Gain in the present and gain in the future, those are different things that may come up. But right now, it's really going to be mostly around what's that current pain that that person may be going through, and how can you relate to them. Now, with that said, I want to make sure that, Keith, are you unmuted?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. All right. So what Keith's going to do, he's going to take you through a breakout. He's going to set this breakout up. So Keith, it's all yours.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm seeing some good conversations both in the breakouts and in the chat. So this next part here is going to be talking about what could be a potentially sensitive situation. And I'm going to give 2 quick slides here in a moment, just to be able to kind of talk through what we're doing and what our clients are doing as well. Because let's face it, we all need to make sure that we're bringing in revenue for our own companies, and we need to make certain that we're also not killing our brand or looking like those sleazy salespeople. And I don't know about some of you, but I have gotten some of those emails or LinkedIn messages where they seem a little tone deaf. It's kind of like, hey, first off, how are you doing? Then let me try to sell you something. And I think there's 2 things we're going to talk about. The ability, does my team or do I know how to say the right things in the right ways to the right people, kind of going back to that care part, or motivation. Am I just not comfortable doing it because I don't want to be perceived wrong? So 2 quick examples. Chris, if you could show the first slide.
Yep.
All right. I do. So one of the things that Chris mentioned earlier is the behaviors. What I can control is how many times I'm reaching out each day to people in my network. It's clients to see how things are going. It's partners, perhaps other people that have clients that might be impacted, and colleagues in general. Just genuinely trying to see how many people I can touch, or you, your family, your team, your clients, how are things working. And what I'm doing is going through all of my LinkedIn connections, and I have probably 3,900. Some of you have probably received this message, and it's simply, hey, how are you and your team doing through all this craziness? And I'm lightening up the mood just a little bit. Notice, and I know that others have received it, there's no selling, there's no links, there's no requests. I'm genuinely reaching out to say hi. And I've done this, and I'd say in the last 12 hours, I've probably received 60 responses just from this message. And they're letting me know this is going great, this is not going great, here's what's going on. So there's something that along the lines of acknowledging, that's great to hear, sorry to hear, hey, I'm hearing a lot of that, not uncommon. And then they typically, because they were raised right, they typically ask me, how are you all doing? And my response is, we're doing well, thanks. We're working with clients, colleagues, questions on managing this and how to sell in this right thing. You can see the words on the screen. So I'm actually mentioning very gently, what are the kind of things that we're hearing and seeing? And what's happened is many of them have said, we're doing great. I know some people that might need to go ahead and talk to you, or that's great, keep up the great work. And then that's it. It's not a hard sell, but I have 5 meetings that are scheduled, again, just since yesterday afternoon, using this. And I have multiple people. For those of you that know Connelly McKenna, who couldn't join us because she's doing a LinkedIn training now, this is something that we talked about on a previous webinar that she did on how do you reach out to those people in a caring way. Chris, the next slide for a little more detail.
Okay.
All right, I don't see it yet. There we go. So one of the questions that people have said, and this was clients, even our sales mastery classes past Tuesday, how do I know who to contact? As Chris mentioned before, current clients and be general. How are you? How's the team? Is there anything I can do to help? A, they're going to appreciate the touch point, and B, thinking about that expand. If there is anything above and beyond what you're already doing that might be able to help them through this tough time, then you can certainly have the conversation. We're not looking to upsell them per se and be sleazy, but at the same time, there could be something genuinely that you can help them with. Past clients, as Chris mentioned before, hey, it's been a while, wanted to check in on you. Same as before. How are you, the team? Anything I can do to help? The partners, colleagues, and centers of influence, COIs, ask them, how are you doing? And how are your clients? I've had countless conversations with HR consultants and insurance people and legal and all this different stuff where someone in my network can help someone that I'm talking to. And for those that are curious whether or not this is going to work, and this is going to lead us into the breakout session, one of our clients was overwhelmed with the possible people she could reach out to, realized that 400 or so had somehow had some interaction with the company over the last 5 years. She started reaching out with these kind of messages early on, checking on how things are going. And it happened to be, thanks for reaching out. We're glad you're called. And she closed the deal this past Monday. And it was done in about 3.5 weeks, where something would have typically taken closer to a year or more to be able to close. So by reaching out genuinely, you never know what kind of conversation you could start. And at the same time, it's a way to keep that pipeline going. So as we go into this breakout that Chris is going to put us here in a minute, let's talk about what are those touches? What are you saying? Who are you saying? And if you've had some successes, please share it to some of the others that may not be doing it yet or might be a little reluctant to do so.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keith. So I'm going to start the breakout. Again, share what's happening with you, your reach out, be vulnerable. If you felt that it's been hard and maybe you have not reached out, share that as well, because it's all real. So please share with each other, and the breakout's going to open up now. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I want to go ahead and mute everyone for this last part, and we're going to do one more breakout. I know we're running a little bit short on time. If we can bleed over a little bit after 12, normally don't like to do that, but hopefully we can for this last breakout. Now, you talked about a lot of different things around how you can be relative, how you can reach out, how you can be there for your customers, how you can be that trusted advisor, how you can be a giver, how you can do all these different things, and it's so important. Now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about you. And you may have already mentioned some of these things, but how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Do you feel more isolated than you should? Are you going stir crazy? Are you able to engage other members of your family in different ways? Is your dog or cat becoming more of your best friend or getting on your nerves? What's happening with you? So take about 5 minutes, talk about that, share some vulnerabilities, share what's going on. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you staying up late and having the laptop in front of you until 11:30, then trying to go to bed? What are these things that are going on with you? So please talk about that, and then we will wrap up from there. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to mute everyone for this last part, and then I'll open it up, and we'll close out the webinar in just 2 minutes. So thank you all very much for sharing everything that you're sharing as far as how you're doing. And I did want to make a mention. I had there was a few folks. I want to show the virtual settings. Right now, it looks like I'm in our training center. But if I go in, I choose a virtual background, I take that off, I'm actually in my basement. And it's one of the cool things about this Zoom is that it allows us to look at different things. We've used Zoom for a while, for a couple of years, and never realized there were so many different bells and whistles inside of it. So as all of you look to up your game as far as communicating with your clients, with your prospects, et cetera, there's a lot of cool things to look at inside of there. So Keith and I and our entire team at McDonell Consulting Group, Sandler Training, want to thank all of you for joining us. And we will have continued webinars. We will have at least one a week like this. We love getting everyone together. for these breakouts. It's good to be able to share best practices, share vulnerabilities, and we thank you for that. We are going to send them the follow-up. If you haven't joined yet, there's free resources, a link that we're going to send out with leadership podcasts, white papers, etc., and much, much more, as it says on there. Keith and I will be posting an update on this on social media. We'd appreciate if you would like and share that as we go through this as well. We thank you all very, very much for your time today. I'm going to unmute just for a second as we close this out. So thank you all very, very much. Whoops. Thank you all very, very much. We'll chat soon and enjoy your lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.